All right, so we are going to do just a couple of things today to tie up loose ends. One thing I told you I would do is revisit this problem from Wednesday, where you had to do synthetic division with a fraction, and then you had to do that balancing act. Let me show you what it looks like if you do long division, and then you can kind of pick your poison. So if you're not crazy about long division, then you need to be okay with the balancing act. If you're fine with long division, you might like this better. So here's what I need you to know. If x equals 1/2 is a solution, then x minus 1/2 is a factor. But guys, that's not the way it appears. Hopefully you know that the way it would appear in an equation is that 2x minus 1 is your factor. So this is what we're going to divide by, and that helps you avoid the fraction issue. So if you do long division, the bar goes up and over instead of down and over like it does with synthetic. So the other thing is, if you do long division, you actually use x's in your work, and it takes more space. But sometimes people really don't like that balancing act. So here we go. When you do long division, you only divide by the 2x. So the first thing you're doing is you're saying, let me take this 2x cubed and divide that by 2x. Do you see that that would just be x squared? X squared is what you put right here, okay? And then when you multiply the x squared by all of this. So x squared times the 2x is 2x cubed. And then x squared times the -1 is negative x squared. Put that in parentheses and now subtract. So you divide, then you multiply it out, then you subtract, and you bring it down, and you go again. So those are your 1, 2, 3. You keep traveling through these 1, 2, 3 operations. All right, so 2x cubed minus 2x cubed zeroes out, and it should. If it doesn't, there's an issue. So now you do 11 minus a negative, which means plus. So 11 plus 1x squared is 12x squared. And you bring down the 10x minus 8. So now we go back to division. So at this point, take your 2x and divide it into 12x squared. Well, if I said, what is 12x squared divided by 2x, would you see that it's, 6x. So plus 6x is what you put here. Now remultiply. So 6x times 2x is 12x squared. These two are supposed to match. 6x times -1 is -6x. So we've done division, multiplication. It's time to do the subtraction part again. So I'm going to subtract. 12x squared minus 12x squared cancels out, and it should, or you're doing something wrong. 10x minus a negative means 10x plus 6x. And bring down your 8. So now we go back to division. So now you say, what's 2x into 16x? So 16x divided by 2x, 8. So now remultiply. So 8 times the 2x is 16x. And then 8 times the -1 is -8. If these two are identical, when you subtract, it's going to turn out even. I don't know if you all saw that in elementary school, but when you do the double line, you're saying 0 remainder, it divided evenly. So that way you don't have to write down like R0, like I've seen some elementary school teachers do. It's easier to just write this. So now what I know is if you take the original problem and write it in factored form, your factors are the 2x minus 1 you divided by, and then the x squared plus 6x plus 8 that we got up here at the top. Well, guys, this is what you got on the other problem, but this time you didn't have to do the balancing act. So you can either do synthetic division, which is faster, but then account for the balancing act, or you can do log division and don't worry about the balancing act. And FYI, we factored this guy by saying x squared is x times x, and we figured out 8 is 2 times 4, because that gives you 4x, 2x to give you the 6x on the middle equals 0. And then 2x minus 1 gives you an answer of 1/2. X plus 2 gives you an answer of -2. X plus 4 gives you an answer of -4. So here is another problem I just wanted to briefly mention to you. Number one, do you see that I have this thing completely factored because I have all my little groups multiplied out? All right, guys, that makes it really easy to get the answers, okay? So I wanted to mention to you too, this 3x is to the first power understood. The 3x plus 1 is also to the first power understood. And do you remember me telling you, if it's in factored form, I could take the 3x to the first, the x minus 5 to the third, the 3x plus 1 to the first, the 5x minus 8 to the second, and the x plus 11 to the fourth, and say, if you add those, let's see, 1 and 3 is 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, that you get 11, and that's the degree of the polynomial. So what that tells me is that I should get 11 solutions. So from the 3x to the first, I should get, remember, if 3x equals 0, that just means divide by 3, x equals 0. For x minus 5 cubed, I'm going to get x equals 5 3 times. Now, this is an odd way to write it, but this is technically what it means. For 3x plus 1, do you see that you're going to get x equals -1/3? Do you feel comfortable skipping steps there? For 5x minus 8 squared, do you see that you're going to get 8/5 twice? And for x plus 11 to the fourth, do you see you're going to get x equals -11 4 times? And then if you count, you've got, remember, this is there. So I didn't want you to think those were two different answers. You get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 answers. Okay, so you do get 11 answers, but this is not normally what we would say. Normally, you're going to say, okay, I have single roots, and that would be 0 and -1/3. I have a double root, and that would be at 8/5. I have a triple root, and that would be at 5. Now, guys, we normally don't deal with anything more than single, double, triple roots, but I can say that -11 is a quadruple root. The problem is, after quadruple, we don't have nice little names for it. Now, by the way, if someone said, here's the information, can you count the degree? You would say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So I'm going to count it again. Singles are 1, 2, the double you count twice, so 3, 4. The triple you count 3 times, so 1, 2, 3. The quadruple you count 4 times, so 1, 2, 3, 4. And I got 11 tick marks, meaning degree 11. But we don't normally say quadruple root. And then if you had a root that was to the 5th power, then what do you call it? Is it a quintuple root? Like, what's the vocabulary? So instead, we talk about multiplicity. And this is just a fancy way. If I said 0 is a root of multiplicity 1, it means it's a single root. 8/5 is a root of multiplicity 2, means it's a double root. 5 is a root of multiplicity 3, means it's a triple root. So -11 is a root of multiplicity 4. So the multiplicity just tells you whether it's a single, double, triple root or higher. So if I said, okay, 10 is a root of multiplicity 6, that means I get x equals 10 as an answer 6 times in a row. And it also means that x minus 10 to the 6th power will be in the factored form of my equation. So that's just a little vocabulary tie up. But really, when you're in Algebra 2 and pretty much in pre-calculus, you're not going to work generally with anything higher than single, double, triple roots. You generally will not be asked to work with quadruple roots or higher. Okay, so I again just want to review the two big things that we're doing, and this will be what the quiz is about, all right? So the other thing I'm trying to do is link vocabulary so you're not confused on that. So if I tell you that f of x equals 4x to the 5th minus 25x cubed plus 4x squared minus 25, write this one down and work it with me. If I say find the zeros, remember finding the zeros means, sorry, I've gone out of focus for a minute. Finding the zeros means to find the solutions or the roots, and it's essentially the same as finding the x-intercepts, but I'm going to actually clear that up with you just a little bit next week. But they're all pretty much the same. What I mean by find the zeros of the function f of x is just to solve the equation equal to 0. So if you solve this equation, that's what we've been doing, and that's the same thing as finding the zeros. So your process is to first look for GCF. I do not see a GCF. Then what you do is say, well, will this thing factor just normally, where I don't need synthetic division? Well, there's 1, 2, 3, 4 terms, so I'm thinking to group it. When I group it, can you see that the first pair has a GCF of x cubed? And I would have 4x squared minus 25 left over. If you multiply it back out, that gives me 4x to the 5th, and that's true from the step above, and minus 25x cubed, and that's true from the step above. Bring down your plus sign. Now on 4x squared minus 25, I don't see a GCF, so just 1. And it's going to be times 4x squared minus 25. And that makes sense because the 4x squared minus 25 matches. And that's equal to 0. So then I say that means I've got 4x squared minus 25 times x cubed plus 1 equals 0. Now, since this is a quadratic, I've got to try to keep factoring. Well, do you notice with two terms, you always try difference of squares first, and this is a difference of squares. And you had to know I was going to put in a difference of squares. Why? Because it's my favorite kind of factoring. It's fast to recognize, and it's fast to actually do the factoring on. Now, the x cubed plus 1 is two terms, so you've got to try to factor it. But x cubed is not a perfect square. It is a perfect cube. 1 is also a perfect cube. So I've got to review doing factoring of perfect cubes. So I got to bi, tri, soap. So bi, tri, soap. So remember, soap is same, because it's x cubed plus 1, it's going to be plus. Opposite, always positive. The cube root of x cubed is x. The cube root of 1 is 1. So here, I do first squared, so x squared. In the middle, it's first times second. X times 1 is just x. Here, it's second one squared, so it's 1. Now, you're going to have 5 answers, because remember, the degree is 5, all right? So I want to remind you that these two clean factors are going to give you x equals negative 5/2, x equals positive 5/2, and you're allowed to say plus or minus 5/2, that's fine. This clean factor gives you x equals negative 1. Remember that when you do bi, tri, soap factoring, the quadratic part will not factor again. And remember, if you've got a quadratic factor that you can't get to factor again, the answers are going to be messy. So I know that these are going to give me, the x squared factor is going to give me 2 more answers, and they're going to be messy. So how do I get them? Well, what other ways do you have to solve a quadratic if it doesn't factor? I'm hoping you're thinking, well, I could do quadratic formula or complete the square. All right. With it being 1x in the middle, I am not completing the square. I am going to do quadratic formula. So we're going to sing x equals negative b. So negative b would be positive 1 plus or minus the square root of b squared. Negative 1 squared is positive 1. This is always positive. Minus 4a is 1. C is also 1. All over 2a. 2 times 1 is 2. No, I don't sound any better on video. You're right about that. So 1 plus or minus. I always said no one at my church has ever asked me to sing in the choir. So if you plug this in on your calculator, you're going to get negative 3 all over 2. So that's going to give you x equals 1 over 2 plus or minus. Remember, the square root of negative 3. Oh, I'm off screen. Sorry about that. The square root of 3 is the square root of 3i all over 2. So you put it in a plus bi form, right? So 1/2 plus root 3 over 2i is an answer, and 1/2 minus root 3 over 2i is an answer. And remember, if you want to call it I square root 3 all over 2, perfectly fine. So I get 1, 2, and then 3, 4, 5 answers, and that goes with my 5th degree polynomial. So I have 5 answers, 5 solutions, 5 zeros, 5 roots, all the same basic thing. So this is the last thing we're going to go over, and then I want you to spend the majority of your time today not on taking notes, but on practicing the quizzes. And we've not put a lot of messy questions in the quizzes. They're not too bad. All right, so remember, find the zeros of g of x means that you're solving x cubed plus 2x squared minus 35x plus 104 equals 0. And if I say that g of negative 8 equals 0, I'm telling you that x equals negative 8 is a 0 or it's a solution. So I'm telling you, go ahead and do synthetic division. So I've got negative 8. 1x cubed, 2x squared minus 35x and plus 104, no 0 placeholders necessary. Bring down 1. Negative 8 times positive 1 is negative 8. Add 2 and negative 8 to get negative 6. Negative 8 times negative 6 is positive 48. Let's see here, 48 minus 35. 8 minus 5 is 3. 4 minus 3 is 1. And then negative 8 times positive 13 is negative 104. Yay. And remember, if I tell you something is a 0 or a solution, you're supposed to get 0 remainder. So now on my factoring, because negative 8 was one of my answers, roots, solutions, zeros, whatever you want to call it, I know that x plus 8 is the baby factor it comes from. Remember, this 13 is 1's negative 6x, so that starts with 1x squared minus 6x plus 13, and that's equal to 0. Now, you may be thinking, wait a minute, your AC is 13, and you can't, 13 is only going to split into 1 times 13, or negative 1 times negative 13. There's no way to add up and get negative 6. So that tells me that this guy won't factor. I tried to factor again so my answers would be neat, but it won't factor, which means I'm going to get messy answers, just like we did on the last problem. How many answers am I supposed to get? Well, g of x has a degree of 3, so I'm supposed to get 3 total answers. So, of course, I know that one of my answers is that x equals negative 8. You already knew that. Well, now I'm going to go get the other 2 messy answers. So I'm going to say x squared minus 6x plus 13 equals 0. How can I solve this quadratic if it won't factor again? Well, again, your choices are quadratic formula and complete the square. Since we just did quadratic formula, let's do complete the square because 6 is even. And sometimes people are hesitant about complete the square. That's why I want you to see it. So remember, with complete the square, you leave the x's on the left, make a space to complete the square. move the plain number negative 13 to the right. So remember, if this is minus, this is minus. So the first thing you do is you say, what is half of 6? 3. So that goes there. What is 3 squared? 9. If you add 9 to the left, you add 9 to the right. What is negative 13 plus 9? Negative 4. Okay. So why do we complete the square? So we can solve by taking square roots. So if I say, let me take the square root of both sides, and remember, if anytime you take the square root of both sides, you introduce the plus or the minus. So what is the square root of x minus 3 squared? Just x minus 3. And that's equal to plus or minus the square root of negative 4. I've got two things I've got to do to finish my problem. So the first thing is to add the 3 to the other side right before the plus or minus. And remember, the square root of negative 4 is 2i. So you do have 3 answers. Negative 8's an answer, 3 plus 2i is an answer, and 3 minus 2i is an answer. And that's it. Those are just a couple of things I thought it might help you to review. Good luck, and let me know if you need help. I'm on Zoom. Okay. Have a good day. Have a good weekend.